Today, we'll be discussing the purpose of God's moral law. And the reason why this is important is because God's moral law is directly associated with death. And the way it's associated with death is because death is the result of our sin, which is the violation of God's law. And in understanding this, we can understand the significance of resurrection. But the other reason why this is important is because we're often inclined to misunderstand the actual purpose as to why God revealed his law to us. So, what exactly is God's law, or how do we define it? Well, God's law is a revelation of the character of God. It's not simply a rule book or a list of religious rules. It's the very essence of who God is. You can't separate the law from God because the law is a part of who God is. There's two different views that people have in regards to why God revealed his law to us. Now, the first view, which we're naturally inclined to want to initially believe, God revealed his law to us because if we follow it, or if we attempt to follow it to the best of our ability, then we can earn God's favor. Basically, in this view, this is believing that we can achieve salvation or achieve righteousness through the law. But the problem with this view is that this is believing we can earn our way into heaven. And it becomes increasingly evident when we study the scriptures that this is not true. And so the other view is that God revealed his law to us to basically reveal to us our sin, or to expose to us our sin. The law in itself does not create sin, but it makes us aware of it. Now, the basic outline of God's law is written in the Ten Commandments, which God first revealed to Moses back in the book of Exodus. And so to help understand the purpose of God's law, suppose somebody steals something. Well, the Ten Commandments tells us not to steal. And so when a person who has stolen something views the Ten Commandments, that exposes to them their sin. And so basically with this view, the law in itself is not how we achieve salvation, but the law reveals to us our need of salvation. Because since all of us have a sin nature, we cannot completely follow God's law. It's impossible for us to do. And so this is another reason why it's impossible for us to achieve salvation through the law. Paul emphasizes this point of where we achieve true salvation in Philippians 3 verses 9 and 10, when he says, "Not having my own righteousness, which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, and the power of his resurrection." What I love about this passage is how he emphasizes the main points, or establishes the main points here. The first main point is we don't achieve salvation or righteousness through our own good works, trying to follow the law. The second main point is how we achieve righteousness and salvation through faith in Christ and the power of his resurrection. And the third main point here is by him emphasizing the power of Christ's resurrection, he's talking about how it is through the power of Christ's resurrection by which death was defeated. And so this gives you a clear distinction between believing in trying to achieve salvation through our own good works versus achieving salvation through faith in the power of Christ's resurrection. God's moral law not only exposes our sin, but it also enforces the consequence of sin. Now, the ultimate consequence of our sin is death. We mentioned this briefly in the last video, how Paul tells us in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Now, what Paul also tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 56, he says that death is the consequence of sin, and that the law is what enforces that consequence of death. Now, in hearing this, a person might initially think, does this make the law bad or evil because it enforces death? And the answer is no. Not only is the law good, but the law is holy. The law enforces the consequence of sin because it upholds God's justice. And this is what makes the resurrection so important, because it is through the resurrection by which Jesus saved us from the power of death. Paul emphasizes the holiness and goodness of the law in Romans 7 verse 12 when he says, "The law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good." So let's go back over some of the topics that we discussed. We first talked about what is God's moral law. Now, God's moral law is a revelation of his character. It's the very essence of who God is. We also talked about what is the purpose as to why God revealed to us his law. Now, the actual purpose why God revealed to us his law is contrary to what we're initially inclined to believe. We're initially inclined to believe that God revealed to us his law so that if we attempt to follow the law to the best of our ability, then we can achieve salvation by doing that. But this is believing that we can achieve salvation through our own good works. And Paul makes it very clear that no, this is not how we achieve salvation. Like, for example, in Ephesians 2 verses 8 and 9, Paul says, "It is through faith by which we're saved, and not by works." So let's break this down. So there's two main reasons why God revealed to us his law. The first reason is because the law reveals to us our sin, or it exposes our sin. The second reason is because the law also enforces the consequence of our sin, which is death. Now, the irony is that we're initially inclined to believe that through our own good works, we can achieve salvation through the law. But the problem with this belief is that the consequence that is enforced by the law is actually what we need to be saved from. And again, that consequence is death. And so this is what makes the resurrection so important. Now, to be clear, it is good for us to try to follow God's moral law. But my point is that we cannot achieve salvation by trying to follow the law. We achieve salvation through faith in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If you enjoyed the content of today's video and you'd like to learn more about resurrection, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. That will help support the channel and help the channel grow.